1974.
That's
So what
correct.
so what were your first memories there on reaching?
First memories was arriving at Airport with lines and lines of people. You had to fill in forms as to where your destination was, and then you were allowed through. And we were met by my auntie and friends of my dad
With some warm clothing.
with some warm clothes, who transported us first through the Heathrow Tunnel that looked like artificial sunlight, because it wasn't normal street lighting I'm used to. And an hour and a half later, we arrived at Ilford, and we had a roof over our head. It was a one room in a shared house.
Eight kids in one room.
Eight of us, yeah, and a shared kitchen, shared bathroom.
Okay.
Wasn't easy, but at least it was somewhere to stay for the first night.
So at this stage you are 17, 18 years old, Melvin?
Around 18,
Okay. So
because
so
I
just
missed
to sorry.
because I missed out on a lot of apprentice jobs.
Right,
As
right,
you,
right.
as
Yeah,
you had
yeah.
to be
Because you were
17.
not, because you were past 17, you could not get the apprentice jobs.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so just to start at the beginning, in case anyone is just wondering where and why this abrupt conversation, today we have with us Melvyn Fernandes, a Goan based in the UK, grew up in Kenya. Uh, many memories, which are common to many people who grew up in East Africa at the time. But I think what separates Melvin is he has always believed in documenting his memories, putting them down, sharing them, talking about them, analyzing them, understanding them, also trying to see the bigger picture and how that fits into this wider story of Goan migration. So Melvin, I'll pass it on to you, but I just want to start. uh, we were talking at the start about landing in Britain in on December on Christmas Eve 1974. But before that, there are many parts to your story. One, of course, is your Africa days, then your times in Britain, the struggle to make it there among the first generation of Goan migrants in the 70s, and then your community networking, and then your involvement in supporting a magazine like Goa Today. That's what inspired me a lot when I heard that story. We'll talk about it later. But also the kind of I don't know if bitterness is too strong a word, but the criticism that you have about the way Goan networking has gone over the years, and you've seen it kind of self-destruct, and maybe more one-upmanship take over. Anyway, I'll stop my long sermon here and put it on to you, Melvin. So your story starts in East Africa in the late 50s, early 60s as a young kid. Tell us about that. What were your most memorable times there?
Thank you, Frederick, for your kind platform to share my story. I was born in '57. I went to Catholic parochial school. My parents worked for the Kenya police and were going on different postings around the country. So I centered with my auntie in Nairobi, mainly because of schooling.
Hmm.
Occasionally, I would have a chance to visit my parents, and normally in the back of a police Land Rover going that way.
That
Could
must
be a
have been fun.
known
That must have been fun as a kid getting rides in the police Land Rover.
as a kid, yes, going off dusty roads of the beaten track, face to face with lions and giraffes and elephants. It was good. We understood each other.
So then,
And
sorry.
this is where the Tom Jones song comes in about getting to the green grass of home. It was like away from the city into the
Right.
deepest of the countryside.
Right. And then you mentioned the point that you studied in the school adjacent to the Holy Family Cathedral, which is now a basilica. And you said it was built mainly by our people with their names written on the walls, engraved on the walls. What exactly is that?
Well, I think our Gond community built the church in Kenya, basically.
Contributed to it largely,
Built
significant.
and contributed to it. I don't know whether physical building was done by them, but they were very good administrators, and basically it was mainly a Gond thing, the church.
Would you say they had a strong community sense in those days, stronger than today, perhaps?
It was strong but very separated. Like you had the Taylor Society, you
Hmm.
had the prejudice of being Bades or Salsate, and that's all I knew. But in
So,
school,
so
everybody was equal.
okay, so there is caste, there's geography, there's class, and all these kind of divisions within the society. I mean, this is like taking a part of Goa to where they are migrating. But there was also a kind of community vision. Although there was this jostling and this infighting, and you heard we hear all the negative side of it. But was there also some kind of community spirit then, which is stronger than today, perhaps? Would you think?
The stronger side was the sporting element
I see.
because all sides had the best sportsmen going, and mainly after work, we either concentrated on sports or socials. We were good at meetings and theatres, and I think that's what kept us going basically.
So sports is basically hockey and cricket, also football.
Hockey, hockey, football, cricket, badminton. I'm trying to think now.
I see.
Those days I used to play marbles, so I didn't really was too much into it.
Yeah, yeah. Because of age reasons, yeah. We
Eight, yeah. You weren't allowed certain games.
so the clubs that we had in East Africa were a thing there and very well organized. In fact, some Goan villages have clubs built on the Africa model. I think Saligao and Moira are influenced by Africa. I don't know if I'm right. But were there also coods in Africa? The club houses where people could stay on a residential basis, was that also there?
Not on a residential place, but it was a
Okay.
place to meet.
Okay.
You had many like sort of the church hall that we have today.
Yeah.
It was a dance floor, an office, a
Not
kitchen.
the residential place, not the residential place like we had in Bombay, Karachi, maybe
No, no.
Calcutta. No.
Dubita
Okay.
Lao is very different.
Yeah, yeah. They are different forms of clubs.
Yeah,
So
but it is the same sort of uh, formulas
yeah,
that took place. Yeah.
yeah. Melvin, you mentioned about the Goan Institute at Juja Road, okay, in Pangini. The foundation stone was laid in 1901. Tell us something about that.
The club, the Corn Institute is where I spent a lot of my time after school. Was sometimes running away from school to play snooker because you weren't allowed to play on those tables.
Yeah,
And we had some very good socials there. I learned a lot about the artist called KG Fernandes, who had Christmas, New Year decorations. He introduced things like luminous paint and lighting effects. Well, it's great. And I knew most of the bands because I had to help them carry the equipment up the stairs.
I see. I see. So basically, the clubs start around the turn of the 20th century, 1901, and it's ironic that even the clubs in Goa start about 10 or 20 years later. The earliest clubs, like Moira, completed a centenary recently. So I don't know whether there is some connection between the two or whatever, but that's interesting. So you talk about the Nakuru race course and things like that, and selling lottery books. Tell us about those things. How important were they in your life?
Nakuru Racecourse was some place to go and see Formula One racing in those days. And my dad uh, had a friend called Joseph Fernandes who worked for Ben Bros or the Cooper Motor Corporation, and he had a Mini Clubman.
Yeah,
So hike, I used to thumb and lift on that Clubman to the Nakuru racecourse.
yeah.
And a friend of mine there, we had a Coca-Cola stall and we sold soft drinks, ice cold.
To raise pocket money.
So we raised a bit of pocket money, and you got money also from the empty bottles that came back.
Okay,
But it was okay. The main point was you had a ringside seat for the racing.
I see.
Yeah, and I got to know what an Alfa Romeo was in those days. Datsun, Toyota Saab. You give
We are
it
talking. We are talking about mid sixties now. Mid sixties, late sixties,
mid 60s, yeah.
mid
And
sixties.
it gave me to the insight of the world outside Kenya.
So if we advance a few years and go into the UK, that's 74 onwards. What was the contrast between, say, life in the UK and life in East Africa? Of course, it's like a world apart. But how would you explain it?
My first impression was people were cold, the society was cold, the weather was cold, and that is what probably united most Goans. They found a way of identifying ourselves as a different race
In the UK or in
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 the
East
UK.
Africa?
Yeah, I mean, I never knew so many village clubs, mushrooms, and what can I say? Because most people started off with dead end jobs. They were not allowed to utilize their skills.
Yeah,
In Africa or in Kenya, most people had their own fairly good accommodation. They had servants. Their life was around parties and work. So there was no worrying about the next. I don't think we even thought of migrating anywhere.
yeah.
Just
Africa was home. Africa was home. No one thought that one day Goans would have to leave it, right?
it did cross our minds because we were we moved from a transition from a colonial society
Yeah.
to an African run society.
In the
society.
60s, in the 60s, but there was not much time to prepare for it because the first signs started coming slowly in the 50s, I'm guessing. And
Yes,
then,
gradually
yeah,
in
yeah.
the 60s.
So, Melvin,
It
you
was
made one point. You made one point that at its peak, there were as many as 50 Goan village associations in the UK. Is that right?
that is correct. Yeah. In
50?
fact, even I was surprised. We
I
had
see.
50. We had 50 presidents, 50 different rules and constitutions, and we've got only one Goa.
So you think it's a good thing or a bad thing? Is that a criticism? I mean, like, okay, the village loyalties are strong even in Goa. Okay, our identities are village identities. That's strongest, maybe because of the proximity, maybe because of other factors. We feel a sense of unity. Of course, there is caste hanging about there somewhere in the background, but it's not only that. It's also that the people I grew up with, I know much better than anyone else.
Yeah.
Do
Well,
you think
so
it's a good thing or a bad thing to have so many Goan associations to organize on village lines?
it, it was a good thing. Everybody was proud of their village.
Yeah.
And that is when we decided to form the Standing Conference of Goan Organizations. In other words, one constitution, one rule for everybody, but you
Hmm.
kept your identity. Because if you combine all the villages together, their total membership would be higher than that of the Goan Association. So why not all be one group?
I remember SCOGO, Standing Committee
Yeah.
of Goan Organizations. But just to shift gears a bit, ironically enough, while Goans were more isolated in the UK, they seem to have not been able to build a Goan networking so effectively as was done in East Africa, for example. Why was that? Was it because the geography was more scattered, people were more busy, they didn't have time, or they didn't have need for each other as much as they had in East Africa, or they were probably more upwardly mobile, all of these factors? What was it?
I think the generation that came did not have the acumen as their elders did or their peers did, which we saw in Canada when they had their youth conference.
I see.
And that there was networking meant something. Here it would have been a new word.
No, I get what you're saying, because when we look back, it was the initiative of one or two persons, or one or two characters who actually made the difference in that sense. So
Yes,
even your coups in Bombay, obviously there is a template started by someone or the other, and then everyone else follows it, and that's how the full network builds up. And then people decide like we don't need it, and some black sheep comes along and decides we can sell it, we can make a fast buck on it, and the full thing collapses in that sense.
that's
So
exactly what happened.
Hmm. Tell us the story about the clubhouse at what's this place where it was thought to be set up in
Beckenham,
the.
Kent.
Sorry,
It was in Beckenham, Kent.
Beckenham, Kent. Okay, so it got burned down. I mean, what was the story behind that? Was that arson? Was that an accident or what?
It was arson, and the president, Mr. Cecil Pereira, went on site. I got a call at 2 o'clock in the morning from a Mr. Norton Antau,
I see.
who told me that the was on fire. And my response was, I said, good. Hope the evil that is surrounding it burns with it. But sadly, the building went, but the evil is still there today.
I know you're a critic of the Goan community leadership at the moment, so what we are going to say is going to earn you and me a lot of enemies. But nonetheless, I won't stop you from saying it. As long as it's fair, and as long as, I mean, if anyone has a counterpoint of view, they are welcome to add their comments there and challenge what we are saying here. But anyway, we will get to that eventually. I want to make this a conversation, if you don't mind, Melvin, moving between East Africa and Britain, not only because it's the same community in two different parts of the world, but also the contrast and the comparisons are very sharp and striking. So if we go back a bit in time to East Africa, we are also looking at playing hockey and football on the grounds of the Nairobi Institute, for example, and meeting under the portraits of the famed Rita Faria, Miss World, which you tell me were in the Nairobi Institute already in those years, maybe late 60s, and you say it was every Goan teenager's pin up the pictures of Rita Faria. Tell us about that.
Well, as a youngster, I don't think we knew what Miss World was all about. And when you came in exhausted from a game of hockey or football, you sat on the sofa or the lounge, and this picture was staring at you. Now, most places you would have the picture of the Queen in the house or the president's picture. So then you asked about it, and you were told this is Miss World, and well, she did look good, I must say.
Yeah,
And it was like a sight for sore eyes. All the fighting on the pitch or the football pitch all went. It was a it had a calming atmosphere.
I see. Rita Faria also visited East Africa. I think there are some pictures of her at the airport which were shared with us by the late Louis Assis Correa and things like that. So
Oh,
that's
must have
also
been before. I was still too young, I think, to have
okay.
noticed.
Okay. So everyone talks about the Woolworth store in Nairobi. Tell us about it.
Woolworths was a great store. Great in a sense. Outside was a post box. It was a meeting point.
Okay.
That basically, if you arrange to meet a date, not meet people, on
Yeah.
the quiet, that is where you met. And inside the store, we had like telephone booths where you could listen to music in order to buy them. But we couldn't afford the records, but we were allowed to listen to them because some of us used to play in bands, and we would go by the music, but we didn't have note sheets or could read music. We just went by the records.
by ear, played it by ear.
Yeah, yeah. Play by ear, as you say. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It was fun, and then the weekend you would know who was going out with whom, even if they were lying. It was a sort of banter.
So, who were the people you remember in those times, in the world of photography, in the world of music, particularly?
Photography, there was Alex at that Sapra Studios. I can't remember everybody, but there
Okay,
was a person I knew in Eldoret who had a dark room in his house, and I learned a bit about brush strokes and this. It was something different.
Short Rodriguez. You're talking about Short.
Well, we called him Short Rodrigues, but I never knew his first name.
I see.
And apologies to his family.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean those typical those Goan nicknames are typical, and I don't think it's meant in an
Well,
offensive sense. So
even in school, the people I don't know their first name, I still have their nicknames.
I see, I
Yeah,
see.
it's quite amazing.
So you mentioned Eldoret. Tell us about the place and how was life in Eldoret different, say, from Nairobi?
Eldoret was higher altitude than Nairobi. To go there, you cross the Rift Valley. Very interesting drive.
That's where the
Uh,
human race is supposed to have been born, or something like that, in the Rift Valley.
I don't know much about that, but I do
Okay,
know it was quite a ride. You had a
I see.
dip in the road. You used to have a dip in the road, and you could see. I think that's where the first satellite stations were put.
I see.
Because I'd seen signs called EarthNet. I didn't know what it meant at the time. And and anyway, going to Eldoret, we had a similar life as Nairobi. You had your clubhouse, and one person I remember in particular was Peter Rodrigues. I say this because he used to come and faithfully make us come and play football because it was
I
too
see.
far to walk. And he'd bring his combi around, take us around, have games. And later on, I met him in London, and he used to run the sports day for the Goan Association. So he really had it in his heart, and he built it up. And
The Volkswagen Combi was quite iconic
yes, yes, it's
as far
what
as
in
East
Europe.
African Goans were concerned, and some of them brought it down to Goa also, I think.
They had the Beetle, the VW. Yeah, yeah.
The
I've
Combi
seen
was more
them.
like a van, no? It was more like a van, or
Combi was more like a van,
okay.
and we didn't have all these laws as we have today. I don't think you'd be allowed to carry so many people in.
So many kids pack all the kids inside the van.
Yes, yes, it was great fun. We
Uh,
actually looked forward to him.
Melvin, you mentioned about the short holidays taking you from Eldoret to Mombasa. How did that go?
From Mombasa, we continuing to Malindi, but the great journey was going back through the Rift Valley, catching the what was known as the Uganda Railway, what became East African Railways, and watching the steam engine with all that steam and smoke, and it was good fun.
I see.
Very comfortable carriages, better than we have here in England, I'll tell you. You got bedding, you had a good night's sleep. You woke up in Mombasa, continued to Malindi, where my grandfather worked at the Sinbad Hotel, and you had the sandy beaches there just like Goa. So it was great.
So, what was the holiday like in Malindi once you were there?
Malindi, we went fishing, we went swimming. We used to test Uncle Paul. We used to wait for the film, latest films to arrive.
Yeah.
Then we'd have a test at home with all the locals watch the film to be played at the Sinbad Hotel the next day. So basically, we were doing a test run that everything was okay. And we had this, another chance to watch the latest movies and all.
So the
And
Castellanos Hotel was one of the landmarks in the place in the area.
it's still there.
I see.
Joseph Castellino and his wife Ermelin. And I think I can't remember all the children's names because some are in America. Sheena here in England. We keep in touch when we can.
And Fort Jesus. Fort Jesus is another landmark that is connected to
Fort
Goa by
Jesus,
history.
Fort Jesus is a landmark which I was amazed to hear was part of the Burma Goa Portuguese Army garrison. And when you look at the distance, then I thought time was slow in those days. You didn't have to get from A to B in a few seconds. It was an interesting place. It just had a sad history about it that when the first Goans probably went there with the Portuguese, the Sultan of Oman, the Omani troops actually slaughtered all the Portuguese and left the Goans behind. So, so that was my first bit of history of the place.
Tell us about the long holidays to Goa.
Well, those were fun.
6 months
6 months, but before going, you sort of got ready. You
for another six
painted.
months.
No, you paint. Yeah, it could be because you
I
had to
see.
paint your trunks. Then nearly everyone took KCC, ghee, milk. Oh, I can't remember. Loads of goodies for people back home.
Things were scarce in those days here.
Yeah, and then your cases were loaded onto the ship's hold by crane, and you had your cabins where there was really good entertainment. There were going stewards then, and my first things were things like lonche, gone pickle, and I mean getting to know my first words of Konkani.
Concrete. Yeah.
And people taking their Mercedes cars and VW Beetles, and they were all going the hold. It was quite funny. Mind you, as a youngster, you didn't understand all that, but I thought, how much more can this ship take? And then when you arrived in Goa, you had the cranes trying to force the hard landing of suitcases so they could split open.
I see.
And
Deliberately,
yeah, yeah,
and take out some goodies
if they could.
if they could.
But I think they were mainly after cloves because
Okay.
cloves scattered all over the place.
I see.
And the goodies couldn't come out, they were too big. Yeah, but that was the sad bit. But anyway, then from there you took your taxi, you went all the way to Kotalim.
Caught
You
a
had
ferry.
a Kotalim ferry because there was no bridge at the time. Uh, you had an what I say, orange with some chili powder
Chili
while
powder.
waiting for the ferry.
Spicy orange.
Spicy orange, call it. Yeah, it was nice.
I've not witnessed that. So I
Yeah,
missed
try
that
it,
out.
try it. Bit of salt, bit of chili powder, or you had what we, coconut with to water.
Okay. Tender coconut water. Yeah.
Yeah, ferry coconut. Yeah. Then you continue. Then you had to wait in Penjim for your next ferry.
Bathing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Bathing.
that is how. Yeah, I only remember these two ferries.
Right. Right.
And then my dad's side lived in Kandolim,
Okay.
Morod.
Okay.
So that's where I spent my younger days. and we have relations in Kalangut and on those areas. So we walked, got to know people, worked on the Shaitan video routine
Okay, okay. In the fields
in
while
the
on
field.
holiday. Huh?
Yeah. So
I see.
I know a bit about Shaitan wells, watering plants.
Dignity of labor was a different thing in those days. I mean, it was perfectly fine to.
Yeah, yeah.
It
And I
was
used to
almost a fun thing.
pick up hay for the water buffalo we had at home. He was a
I
pet.
see.
Yeah.
I see. Everyone had animals in their house. Yeah, unlike now.
Okay.
And Mervyn, you mentioned that the ship you all caught was the SCI ship, Shipping Corporation of India. Always
Ship-
Haryana, or always Haryana, or something else.
Before Haryana, there was Kampala and K- Haranja.
Karanja, Karanja.
Karanja and yeah, but I've never been on them.
Okay,
But I've seen people make replicas of them in Goa.
I see.
Wooden wooden replicas in front of their houses. So it must have been a good trip.
The impact of migration is amazing. If you go to Salsette, particularly villages like Veli, Asolna, you can still find houses named Nairobi and Kenya, and those kind of things. So obviously, and in Badres, of course, it's even more, but maybe the naming is less. I don't know. So you were talking about meeting flying fish and dolphins while you all were on board the ship.
Yeah, we were escorted by flying fish. They were actually flying above water.
Really,
Yeah, it's quite a sight. They still exist today because I saw a picture recently and I made a comment. It brought back memories.
as a kid, it must have been a fun thing, a major fun thing.
Yes, and especially to see the dolphins escorting the ship. So you're being escorted to Goa most of the way.
Yeah. Melvin, you made a comment about Konkani, okay? So there is this very disputed legacy about the diaspora in Konkani. And I have very mixed feelings about it myself because although I'm not East Africa, I have similar problems, similar issues. It is often said that the diaspora looked down on Konkani, didn't care for it, which is partly true. It's not untrue. But at the same time, there was also this language loss happening, the difficulty to pick up a language so many kilometers away from home. And even today, if you want to learn Konkani online, offline, whatever, it's not the easiest language to learn in the world, or even in Goa for that matter. So what's your thoughts on this? Am I right? Am I wrong? Am I partly right and partly wrong?
You're partly right, 100%. So I can't say partly. But what if I look at myself when I came to England? I used to go to night school to study German because I used to go to Germany. Then I used to study French because it was the language for travel, and I was involved with travel firms and all. That would come in handy. And I remember Mr. Barros on a trip to Spain. We had a few pegs. We had this huge debate on Konkani. Lasted about 3 days. The trouble was, I asked him where in Europe do we speak Konkani, Amchibas. But later on in life, I thought about it. You talk to uh, people of the Indians who are part of British India. You can go to any part of the world and talk in their own language. Even here in London, a young child born speaks their home tongue. But we would look upon them. We would look down upon a sari. We would have to wear Western dress. But reality, who really cares? You just need to communicate. And it's not a shame to know your own language. It's an identity. Now, what I find is even our foods are disappearing. Our cultural foods, they don't taste the same anymore. You know,
They've got hybridized and bastardized, if you want to call it that. The food
I
on the
agree.
beach belt is not really.
And this is up to the next generation to pick up on the history and recreate some of it. Because we have a very rich history as Goans.
Extremely, extremely rich. I don't think there's any tiny part of the world that has
No,
played such a interesting, controversial, debatable, helpful, eventful role in global history as as Goa. Maybe I'm overstating my case, but it's a fact. Like
no. We have had people in government in different countries who are Goan
Mm.
and who kept their mark, but they keep to themselves. They won't network with anybody else because there's no facility.
Mervyn, Melvin, I mean, uh, now we shift back to Africa, for example, and it's the 60s, and Africanization is taking place. So you can't get admission to the school at St. Teresa's because of Africanization. This is a strange situation, no? Because Goans had access to a whole lot of schools, and
Yeah.
Goan teachers were all over the place, and now the tables have turned. So admission is a bit of a problem. So tell us about that phase.
I think that's the sad bit of Africanization. Later on, I learned it was an out there an African country becomes successful, and I think that is what it was all about. Because the Goans and all raised up the place to a very prosperous country, and the Indians to the very economical place you want to go to on safari, visit, save, more.
See, I'm not challenging the African perspective on independence, nationalism, their right to define their own path, and that's all fine. And I'm sure there are counter views on that. But the Goan story also needs to be told and needed to be told. And I think people like J.M. Nazareth, Queen's Counsel, has this very interesting book which is still online called Brown Man, Black Country, and his sense of dismay at being told that the country of his birth, the country where his parents grew up, is no longer his country, and he's like so distraught over it, and he cannot accept it. So that was obviously a very tough time. But you grew up reading, say, reading what?
Well, with Gone writers, it was Lambert Mascarenhas's "Soaring Lies My Land." There's one line in there which I can't remember which page. I'll have to look it up and read it again. But it was really touching. He talked about patriotism to your country because if you don't know where you come from, you are nothing.
Without a sense of history, we are lost. Correct? Yeah.
Yeah. And what we see in the UK, what I am seeing is young people, they don't know whether they're coming or going. They don't belong here and they don't belong there. But they think they're British. But when you say you're British, British is made out of many communities. And each one of them still have their culture. They've kept it.
That's the challenge, because we are so westernized. Someone called us coconuts, brown outside and white inside. Because we are so westernized, it can also be a double-edged sword that we merge so easily into other communities and we forget our own identity. But anyway, that's that. So then you also were talking about Enid Blytons and listening to Cliff Richards and Alfred Rose.
Yeah, Alfred Rose was like Konkani, where a mutual friend of ours had a big reel tape, like the old BASF tapes. This is before the Philips
German,
cassette,
German.
cassette tape came along.
Okay, before the cassette tape, BSF tapes. These are round circular spools.
The big
Kind of.
round ones, yeah,
Yeah.
with proper big speakers, which I think even the West Indians wouldn't compete with. And it was like a session, or it was a proper gone session. You had it at parties, and mind you, that was the only music we had on LPs or the vinyl.
So so
Now I
so.
remember, I remember
Sorry.
a school friend, we bought a cassette recorder, an African. He took it to his village for the school holidays. He, he taped elders conversing. He played it back to them, and the machine was clubbed to death because they thought it was some ghost.
I see.
In the remote villages, this was something new.
I see.
And I think it was banned from coming back for a few years.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Well, and I used to fiddle about with a friend of mine called Sparky, repairing broken machines.
Lucky what?
He was an electrician,
Okay. Go
so
on.
we
Go
call
on.
him Sparky. He had a nickname called Sparky.
Okay.
And that's where I handled the first soldering gun and things like that. So you learn things as you go along.
In those days, radio electronics, ham operation, DXing, these were the high-end stuff of a young boy, young man's life. No, in that sense, that
Yeah,
was high
yeah.
tech. What computers is today and software is today and apps are today, those things were then. Interesting, interesting. But would it be right, Melvin, to say that the East African community, in some ways, had such a close connect to Goa that they were almost another Goan village, or more than one Goan villages, because they listened. I don't know if they listened to, but there were radio broadcasts targeted at East Africa in Konkani, for example. There were all these cultural products coming out from Bombay, from live wires like Alfred Rose and others, which were being obviously being marketed in East Africa. It was seen as a big market probably there, and there were other associations which were a replica of Catholic life back home. For example, the Legion of Mary, which you mentioned as we were discussing earlier. Would you agree?
I would agree. I think in East Africa we were more closer to Goa than people in Bombay were to Goa.
Yeah,
Yeah. And and also I think because life was slow. If you wrote a letter, you might get a reply in a month or 2 months.
yeah.
And everything moved at that pace. Because that was my impression when I came to Goa, that the people in Bombay were completely different.
I see.
And in East Africa, I think they took their skills with them. The ladies, the cooking, the recipes. Okay, we did have Western dishes, but our main dishes were still there
Goan
with the
bands,
right taste.
Goan bands in East Africa.
The gold bands were very competitive, very good. As I said, in those days there was no sheet music, and any new song was pretty well organized within a day.
People talk about listening to the lyrics on the radio and copying it down. I don't know. That used to happen here, but I don't know there.
Yes, yes.
I see.
Even I used to, but I couldn't work out the words sometimes. The accents were different. I,
Hard to
I used
catch.
to be
Hard to
involved.
catch.
I used to be involved with helping out, taking band equipment to functions. There again,
Which
I got a
bands?
ring
Which
sign.
which bands? Which bands?
Well, in Nairobi, mainly less typhoons. There was the Amigos, the Scooty and the Supersonics. I'm trying to think. There was the Shiftas.
Shifters.
They
Our
were in
friend,
Mombasa.
our friend, the founder of it passed away recently. No, that is
Yes, yes, Benny said.
Benny,
Yeah,
Benny. So of course, even Cyprian Fernandes Skip has written a full book about Goan music and
yeah.
sport.
Cyprian's book, I can't remember the name, but he's
Stars
got
next door.
also, what was the name?
Stars next door. Stars next door.
Charles. Okay. Uh, but he's got his stories in those books is basically our story.
Your years
Uh, Before and after.
before and after. He
Yeah.
waited there later, and he's a bit senior to us, right?
Yeah, I knew of him. I knew Paul Fernandes, who passed away recently. He worked for the Daily Nation. He was a
Paul
sports
Fernandes.
reporter.
I've heard of the name. Journalist, yeah. He was in Kenya all this time. He stayed on there, or he moved. Paul,
He, Paul, Paul became my neighbor here in London, not far away,
I see,
2 roads away.
I see.
And his wife is the current president of Haligao Association,
Who's that? What's her name?
Vanessa.
I see. Okay, 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 okay. Vanessa Vaz, yeah,
Yeah.
formerly Vaz. Yes, and
And that and
sorry,
that's one of the organizations still going strong.
yeah.
You know,
So
of the 50 organizations we have, I think there's only 4 or 5 still around.
why is this happening? Is there less of a need for them?
Well, basically, from what I can see, it's mainly egos because you're capturing the same crowd for your function. You might have your function, but you used to have speeches of the president and another speech from the guest. In the meantime, people who came for good quality music and dancing time was cut short.
Hmm.
And I think that's the main thing. And I would put it down to ego, which they don't realize it. But Matheny Saldana, when he came to London, he talked of the Portuguese word grandeza. And that was a new word to me, but I think it's the same thing, which is mainly a great downfall.
We have to
So,
learn from our mistakes, and
yeah, so today
yeah.
we've got all these dormant organizations with dormant bank accounts,
Hmm.
and the banks are happy because they can earn on it.
While the community has a lot of plus points, we have some negative points, very strong negative points, which probably we need more openness to face up to, and that's where people like you come in. But tell us, Melvin, what do you remember of the Idi Amin expulsion of Ugandans, and how was it manifested to you all in Kenya or wherever?
In Kenya, we didn't see much of it, but the hatred was coming across. You could see it in the newspapers, in the way the Africans started behaving. Uh, People who were traveling by train really had a rough time. I won't mention all the bits because I'm due to respect to their families. Our Goans who worked in the civil service, I think they came by air transport. A lot of them lived at Royal Air Force Base, Manston, as their first when they first arrived, and they've settled in the Bexley Heath area of London. I mean,
No.
if you go to London, people of different. It's funny how people of different areas have lived in such areas. Like Tootingback became the hub of the Kinyagons.
I see.
Yeah, and that the same life continued. Still had parties because most people had dead end jobs. So on the weekend, that was the only time to socialize and be equal.
We'll come to
Then
that
you and
later about the weekend London socializing. But since we were talking about the Ugandan nations, then some ended up at Mombasa, and I mean, is Mississippi masala kind of realistic rendering of these scenes, or what?
yes, yes, I did see the film, and it shows the behavior of the president of Uganda taking over people's properties, distributing it. There was lack of law and order, basically.
I see.
Like just like we have a bit in Goa today, sad to say.
Hmm.
We've got proper admin systems, but those systems are not being used. It's what who says what and who says does what,
Yeah,
and that's not a way to run a place.
yeah. So tell us how did your shift come about from Kenya to the UK? You need a sip of water, or are you getting tired, or are we carrying on? I
No,
mean,
no, no. It's just that I'm trying to. keep in with your camera. Sorry. We left Kenya gradually, because we had to wait in the voucher system. And when our turn came, you went.
Parts of the family going earlier than others?
Yes, yes.
I see.
And in our case, we were fairly lucky because my dad left earlier in
Yeah.
advance to arrange for accommodation and all that. We were helped mainly by the Sikh community and one gone.
The Sikhs
And
are quite a
even,
charitable lot in that sense.
yeah, and we're still friends today.
I see.
Till today, they were feeding the Goans in Hounslow and Southall, the Sikh community, due to COVID. People were actually queuing up. That's how bad things are.
I see.
It's a shame. It's a shame our own people can't do that. And
Right.
and there was as far as I'm concerned, it was a false statement by the Goan Association to Suela Fernandes from Asagao. She is now Attorney General.
Yeah.
The statement made that they supplied 6,000 meals to whom nobody knows. Because I've not met any Goan who's received a food parcel.
I see.
Yeah. And this is, to me, just something to put on the account books to extract money from the organization.
Yeah. Sometimes things look good on paper, but the reality is something
Yeah.
else. So
I'm not in touch with these people. I don't recognize any of them. I,
we'll come back to that. But tell us about your shift over to the UK.
my shift, we came by East African Airways, which is now Kenya Airways, because even the East African Unity broke up and formed their own Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. We arrived in UK. The first thing was to look for the church. We found, and then communication was mainly by the phone box, which you needed plenty of change to ring around. And because you had no mobile phones, I think you could remember most people's number by heart. You didn't even write it down. And that was our communications. And if you had a house party, you'd know you're going. And I was quite puzzled once. I bought a tin of mincemeat, thinking it was mincemeat in the tin, like
Yeah.
the Coke can.
Yeah.
And I went for the party. We cut the onions, got all the things prepared, opened this tin of mincemeat, and it wasn't meat as we know as mincemeat. It was the savory you get in mince pies and Christmas cake.
I see.
But never mind, it tasted good. Yeah.
So in that sense, you were welcomed. Your family was welcomed by whom once you all settled there?
We had close friends, the Carvalhos from Eldoret, and the Sikh community mainly.
Yeah.
My dad entertained a lot, so there was always big. It was like Christmas Day every weekend sometimes.
And this
And
Irish social worker who helped you all?
yeah, there was a lady called Mrs. Walsh,
Okay.
and it was a friendly face in a cold environment.
Yeah.
And she brought this huge hamper of food, which was welcome. We just arrived.
I see.
We didn't have anything on us apart from the warm clothes my auntie brought at the airport.
And you
And
all are 8 kids living in a one-bedroom house. 8 kids and two parents.
no, no, one room in a maybe two,
Okay.
3 bedroom house, but it was shared.
Okay. And 8 kids. Oh wow.
Yeah.
That's quite something. So
But we
finding
were
a
small. We were
yeah,
small.
they
You
were
could
small.
fit all eight on one bed.
Finding a job was not easy.
Finding a job was not easy,
Why?
and mainly prejudice. And also with me, I was waiting for my results to arrive, the Cambridge Overseas exam results. So I didn't have any paperwork of qualifications. And when you went to look for a job, the first thing they would ask you, have you got any London experience? The answer would obviously be no, knowing full well you just left school. So just to get that London experience, the Mumford family who ran the Sinbad Hotel in Malindi, they arranged for a job for me in the wine cellar at the Savoy Hotel. Oh, I was happy at that age. I thought, wine, great. But what I didn't realize was all the bottles were sealed. But in consolation, there was a huge beer barrel with real ale.
I see.
That was a compromise.
Without a seal.
Yeah. But the sad bit was the lady who worked in the cellar did the accounts. Then just recovering from the Second World War, which we didn't see in Africa.
Okay.
And her, her her brother was a prisoner of war of the Japanese, and he had his head hacked off as a prisoner,
I
and
see.
she never got over that. And in a way, I could understand her emotions at work. So I put up with any whatever she said.
I see.
Yeah.
So
So
then
anyway,
after that, sorry.
I was there for about 3 years
Yeah.
because basically what I found was to if you take the wrong job to start with, to get into a job you trained for was very difficult.
I see.
And the, there was a vacancy at the Daily Mail newspaper in the competitions page or something. It was meant to be for 1 week, but it lasted 2 weeks. But anyway, the wages for that 1 week was more than 1 month's salary at the Savoy.
I see.
So I took leave of that and I hooked off from there. And I got a job as a filing clerk in an insurance company. That
Yeah.
was meant to be for just 3 days. I lasted for about 6 months.
Oh,
And it was, I wish I had stayed on the insurance side because they did lap, lap insurance, they did aircraft chartering and all that, which I didn't understand.
I see.
But it was big money.
I see.
You had a subsidized meal for about 15 pence, a good three-course meal. It
Wow.
was a totally different world from everybody else.
I see.
And then from there, I'm trying to think. I,
UCL. UCL.
UCL, I worked
University
as a
College London.
volunteer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also as a volunteer, it was a designated hospital in those days
Yeah.
in case there was a plane crash. Because
I see.
at any one time there was 900 people waiting to land at Heathrow. So there was a contingency for that. But I was mainly there to do the hospital radio, visit the ward rounds, and I met totally different people from what I used to read on the newspapers.
In what sense?
But the newspapers were very biased and racist. And if you were educated, I think you could see through that. But a lot of people are not.
The
It's what they
tabloids,
call,
tabloids in particular, I would guess.
yeah, it's what you call here the working class.
Okay.
And depending on which way the newspapers dictate, they would vote according to the newspapers. There was no common sense.
Yeah.
And that's how the country is actually run, to be honest, till
Then
today.
tell us this other story about Goa today, which I found very fascinating. How there's this community paper in Goa, which is trying to make its mark, and you all guys help it there.
Right. Goa today, I forgot to tell you, was when we went to Woolworths in Woolworths in Kenya. I picked up my first copy. I think we've lost.
No, 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 no. It's fine. It's fine. I'm just trying to put the spotlight on you. Don't worry if I'm out of the frame. Just carry
Okay,
on.
sorry.
Just
I
carry
thought
on.
we lost sound.
Just carry on.
Yeah.
I'll just move out of the
I
frame.
picked up my first copy in Nairobi, and that's why I came across names like Alfred Rose and I can't remember the theatrists, no. And I used to take it to school. We used to pass it around. So when I came to Goa from London, I thought we don't have anything in London. This is a good sort of newspaper. Although we had subscribers from the UK for Goa Today, we needed more. And I was doing the Goan Association newsletter. So I had gone to the tourist office to try and get some pictures. And I met a Mr. Joel D'Souza, whom we were friends for many years, who
Joel
gave me
from
some
Asagaon.
very good
From Asagaon, the journalist Joel D'Souza.
Asagao Joel, yes. He gave me
Okay.
some very good black and white prints. He said you can use these. And I
Okay.
did. And one of them I used on the back page was Rampon cars bringing the fish on the beach. And that picture brought in so many phone calls of people remembering their early days. I thought it was worth it. I, I didn't get a chance to tell him, but that's what happened. And we kept going. The newsletter got built up. I worked in the printing press, picked up scales, and with a few volunteers, we kept it going.
So
I can't say that.
you also helped to push the circulation of Goa Today in a way in among the UK community. Would that be right?
Yes, I lived at Stan at village socials. I should pass him around. Basically, what it was the subscript. I met Lambert in London with his cousin, Sebi Gomez, who was on the premises standing committee when we were looking for premises. So what we said, a round of beer in those days was £6. Today, a glass of beer is £5. Anyway, but in those days, uh, if you wanted to subscribe to Go Out Today, a bank draft was £12. So to get your subscription, it would cost you £18. So I made a suggestion that you send me £7, and every 12 people I get, I would send a bank draft. And I had an account with State Bank in Penjim in Goa. So basically, people paid me in £7 in English money, and I would pay Goa Today in rupees the same amount, basically, and it was fairly good going. But then you always get the people who ask, "Oh, what's he making from it?" We've got so non-patriotic people that I'd rather not deal with.
People are a little bit suspicious also, and as the saying goes, no good deed will go unpunished. So if they see someone doing something which they don't understand, they would probably attribute motives to them.
I
Anyway,
think that's mainly the problem, lack of understanding.
but Melvin, to come back to the contentious issue now about the state of Goan community organizations in your part of the world.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that? I know it's a hot potato, but it needs to be tackled nonetheless, and we respect. I may not agree with you on everything, but I respect your right to say it. Please.
Okay. In my opinion, we had a very good organization built with rules and regulations. I'd, I think any organization without proper administrative structure will not survive. Yeah, and I've been like an auditor for camera clubs, organizations that are 100 years old. And what we have among ourselves is basically getting down to a level where doing things rather than what someone thinks, look at what has been done in the past and see what can be done better. And I find that is lacking. I take the feast of Saint Francis Xavier for example. It is one celebrated by all, but very few have any connection with their village in Goa. They might call it their village feast, but I don't know what they might do, might not do. I don't know what the coordination is, say, between the Sarpanch office of the village and all the overseas villages. They all need to get coordinate, and maybe with the NRI office as the lead, have some guidance to build up what can be built locally. We've got the skills. Maybe India's got the labor. And I think the main thing is sorting out admin.
So is there a loss of vision, or is there a loss of leadership, or is there a loss of the understanding of why community networking is so important for all of us, or all of the above, or what?
I think it's lack of understanding what community networking is. I mean, I worked in for the chief scientist in the UK. And at the chief scientist office, you had a book of every specialist in the country. You could pick the phone and ring the person up and put them
Yes.
in touch with each other. I mean, I find myself living in London. If I need a plumber or an electrician or bit of painting to be done, I don't think I'll find any Goan. I'm more likely to find a Romanian or someone from Eastern Europe. Even they've gone back now. There's nobody here. Yeah. So
It's so amazing because at one stage there were leaders. I mean, maybe a bit contentious, who set up these organizations, whether it was newspapers in East Africa like the Goan Voice,
there
or
was
the Foods in
also
Bombay.
there was also one called Lokaji Gozal in Mombasa. I won't talk about it.
Really, scandal
Yeah.
sheet. So this can be a double-edged sword, I mean, good and bad come out of it, and it's a microcosm of all the positives and negatives that we have as a community have. But that's very interesting nonetheless. I before winding up, I just wanted you to say a word on the food, the Goan food in the UK. I think the point you made was interesting. You all had only one restaurant there, and
Yes. And it was great. People traveled from all over the place, miles, just to go and have a penny, I think, or a meal. And it was good. And we also had Goan caterers
yeah,
who serve Goan food at village functions on a village feast day. And a lot of people looked forward to that because they could not cook in their own houses because of the smells of the spices would annoy the neighbors. And that would cause. Today, I don't think anyone complains about Indian food or Goan food. And if I may, I might mention a few names.
yeah, please.
There was a Mrs. De Costa, Mrs. Silvera. I'm trying to think now. Mrs. Brito. God, can't
Fortunately,
remember.
you sent me a list beforehand, so I think we need to pay tribute to these people. Mrs.
No,
Dias,
no.
Mrs.
They actually introduced someone like me to Goan food
Mrs.
in it.
Dias, Mrs. Furtado, and Libby's. Right? That's
Yes.
your list.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And they cooked with pride. One of the things missing today is carrot pickle.
What carrot pickle?
Carrot pickle, yeah, Goan style.
I see. It is
I haven't seen it for years, to be honest.
food is also an important part of culture, I
Yeah,
think.
and this what is missing now. People have forgotten to cook our food. When Sainsbury, one of our supermarket stores, Sainsbury brought out
Yeah,
gone gone fish curry as a ready to eat meal packaged. They sold 50,000 units in one day.
really.
Yeah,
You
and
do get these in Goa also.
yeah, and any any self respecting Indian restaurant will always have a gone dish on your menu just to bring in the crowd.
Yeah,
Give me a
I think
second.
we under. Don't worry, slowly. I think we underestimate the importance
Yes, it is very. It's
of
got a
Goan
very
food in
high
culture.
ranking, and we. I don't know why we look down on it. Our own people.
Yeah,
There's so many dishes. I remember Mrs. Elsie Maciel when I was doing the newsletter.
Mervyn Masia's wife, late wife.
Yes, correct. She brought out a book. I forgot the name now. I think Gone Cooking or something. Anyway, I put it on the newsletter. I got a call from uh, Wisconsin or somewhere in America
Yeah.
wanting a copy of the book,
Hmm.
and they sort of read the newsletter,
I see.
and the same news coincidence the same newsletter was found on a Singapore Airlines flight to Singapore, and another Goan contacted me. So that
Oh.
magazine did travel, and I think people look forward to it. Thankfully, we had a lot of volunteers that kept it going, and I
By the
must
way,
thank them.
you mentioned Elsie's book. After her passing, Mervyn, her husband, gave me permission to scan it. So there is a scanned copy available, and it's available totally free of cost. And I put my email address at the bottom. If anyone gets in touch with me, I'll send them the scanned copy. So that's Elsie's book. I think Go on Cooking, or what's it called? It's called something. The red cover, no, with some dishes on it.
I think it was bluish,
Uh,
but because I had recommended it as a wedding present to married people
I see.
at the
Interesting.
time. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
That's fascinating. Mervyn, before we wind up, is there anything that I forgot to ask you or that you wanted to add? We've done an earlier interview which is on archive.org, and that was about a couple of years back before the pandemic. And it's an audio interview. This is video. So if you search on archive.org for Melvyn Fernandes, you will find the interview there. But Melvyn, have I forgotten to ask you anything, or is there anything you would like to
Frederick,
say?
there is so much to talk about. I think if you're talking about goans, you could go for weeks.
We can do it in parts.
I think we'll do it in parts. Yeah,
Why not? Why not?
yeah.
Why not?
Because now I look at our next generation. There's a total disconnect between I mean, I will know the the parents of someone, but I don't know their children.
Don't worry, that sorts itself out. See, because till I was in my 30s, I was not bothered about who was I and where I came from. And then all of a sudden, these questions start becoming more and more important as you go through life's trajectory and want to see where the connects lie and things like that. So I have a lot of faith that even an interview like this, something which is so simple, which maybe two or five people may watch online, and then maybe 100 200 would later watch it, or maybe a few more. I think all these things add up in the sense that it brings together the pieces of the jigsaw and kind of tells us our story to ourselves.
Yeah.
So
If I may just add something with the
sure, please.
youngsters, I think they are trying to. Some of them are trying. There was a football tournament recently organized by youngsters for youngsters. Their parents called me to visit it, and it was quite oversubscribed.
I see.
And there were children there who've really grown up now, and I didn't recognize anybody, but I knew who their parents were. So
Interesting.
yeah,
Interesting. Thanks a ton for all your time. I'm hoping to keep in touch. I'm really grateful for all that you've done over the years. I've known you since GoaNet was formed in the mid
The first
90s.
day, I think. Yeah,
No, I was not on the first team. I joined about 6 months late, but I've been with them ever since.
yeah.
So that's my only claim to fame. But it's really a pleasure knowing you, Mervyn, and every person who kind of networks with the community also gives us some kind of optimism that all is not lost and that the roots are important and that networking is happening. So I'm so grateful for all that you do, and
Mo-
keep it up, and let's hope
Frederick,
that maybe
one
we can
one
have more
addition.
conversations. Sorry.
One addition. There's only one slight networking that goes on is I think World Goa Day with the musicians,
Hmm.
and they're using technology worldwide, but they're doing something. They're keeping us going. I'd
There are
like to
other
thank.
there are other small efforts. There are magazines in Australia. There is this Radio Mango in Canada, which is now
Mhm.
restarting as a podcast. And it's difficult because we don't have physical places. But I think the contribution of the diaspora should not be underestimated. For the simple reason that if we have clubhouses in certain villages, maybe two or three or five, it's because of this kind of money. I always say that the Saligaon Club, Institute of Saligaon, the money came from Africa and Hyderabad. Okay, so
I
it's
mean, look at the distance between you and me now. We are communicating. We're a few
yeah,
thousand miles apart.
yeah. So
And
even in the 90s, the websites which were started then, the GoaNet, the mailing list which were started, were absolutely revolutionary, and it made communication possible. No,
there were.
so
I was brand new to that. It was like taking your first driving lesson. You were scared to touch the keyboard in case your machine blew up or something. And slowly you got used to it. You because from a manual typewriter to an electric typewriter and then to the computer, which is very quiet, was something new.
but you're very deep into technology. That's another chapter altogether. We won't go into it this time because if we start that, we'll have to carry on for
No, no,
another
no.
hour at least.
That's true.
But
It that's overtaken me as well by now.
don't worry. I mean, that's fine. I really recall that. So at this point, we'll call it a day. We've been at it for almost 80 sorry 77 minutes, which
Gosh,
is quite a marathon. So my brief encounters are hardly ever brief, but that's perfectly fine because everything I learn is a new something educational to me, and I'm grateful to all of you all guys. Keep it up. Cutting
yeah.
here. Good night, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, whichever part of the world. Thanks so much. That for you was Melvyn Fernandes, Goan based in the UK, and amazing networker, a low profile guy. He won't talk about himself. So that's why we've dragged him here and we are doing it for him. Thank you so much. Thanks. Thanks, Melvyn.
Thanks for sharing, Patrick.
Bye. Bye.